You may think you're the king of the cloud, but if you don't have solid Active Directory skills, then your career is going nowhere. In this episode, we're going to take Active Directory to a whole new level, so stay tuned. Greetings, my fellow YouTubers out there. How are you all doing today? I hope that you're all well and that you're still enjoying my channel and my content. And I gotta say, 2,300 subscribers in 1 month. Wow, you guys absolutely rock. I really appreciate it. We're just hitting 12,500 subscribers. I'm really building this channel into what I hope is going to be a great community for you guys out there. All right. Now, a few weeks back, I did a session on Active Directory and it went really, really popular. And I thought, you know, I did some basic stuff there and I want to take this and I want to take your skills even further. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at some of the more advanced features of Active Directory and also in terms of design and management and hopefully going to take your skills a lot further. Now, I really do recommend that you watch the entire video because then you're going to get maximum learning out of it. But what I am also going to do is I'm going to time slice the video, so feel free to jump in and jump out at certain areas or if you want to watch certain bits again. Now, last week I posted on my community page if you wanted to ask questions. So I've got a new feature just near the end of my session today, and it's called Ask Questions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out one random question from somebody. I'm going to go through it and walk through it with you. So watch out for Ask the Question. That's coming up later on. But right now, I think we should talk about Active Directory. Now, as we know, Active Directory, like Azure Active Directory, is Microsoft's accounts database, specifically for Windows Server, whereas Azure Active Directory, of course, is for the Microsoft Cloud and all things Microsoft Azure. But again, it's firmly got its roots on Windows Server. So in the last Active Directory session, by the way, if you didn't see that, then I'm going to put in a card up here and feel free to go on and watch that session first and then obviously come back and watch this one. All right. So today what I wanted to talk about is really connectivity and some of the advanced design and troubleshooting features of Active Directory. So I think without any more jibber jabber, I think it's about time we got on with some demos. All right, if you've got questions, comments, get them down below and I will definitely go ahead and answer them. So let's jump in with the demo. Enjoy. Okay, so just before I get into an actual demo, what I just want to do is just walk through a little bit of theory with you. So in this example, I've got a single domain. It's called adatum.com. And in here, you can see that I've got a domain controller. Now, the domain controller essentially maintains a master copy of the Active Directory database. The Active Directory database is a file and it's called NTDS.dit, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. Also, on Active Directory domain controllers, it maintains a copy of the SYSVOL, the system volume, and the SYSVOL contains all the user and computer profiles for your users in your organization. All right. Now, an Active Directory domain controller also takes the role of something called a key distribution center. So a domain controller with a KDC, when a user signs into a workstation, for example, Windows 10, the user enters their username and password, and it requests something called a TGT, or a ticket granting ticket. And one of the roles that the KDC plays is something called the TGS, or Ticket Granting Service. So the ticket requests a TGT via the TGS. This is great acronyms, isn't it? So basically, in English, what does that mean? So the server looks through a list of all the user's rights and permissions for files and whatever roles the user has, and it essentially compiles a token, a cookie, if you will. And this uses a protocol called Kerberos, and it's an authentication protocol. So it compiles this ticket granting ticket and it returns it back to the user. Now, if the user requires access to, let's say, a resource, and in this case, we have, let's say, an Exchange server, the user will then send the TGT back to the ticket granting service, who will then check the user's permissions. If those permissions are correct, it updates the TGT, sends it back, and the user then sends the TGT to the service that they're trying to gain access to, and that's it. They're perfect. They got access. So going back up here to the domain here, another really important concept is, of course, this directory service that we have. I mentioned that it's an Active Directory database, and the database is called NTDS.dit. So how do we replicate this database around our organization? Well, you can see here that it would be a very bad idea just to have a single domain controller, because that essentially is a single point of failure for your entire company. So it's much more likely that you're going to have a few domain controllers. Now, in this case, let's say, for example, we're in London. Now, London, we have a big office. You might decide to have 3 domain controllers in London. And these basically all have a master copy, a read-write copy of the Active Directory database. Now, what happens is when a user signs in, the user gets their ticket granting ticket, and that's absolutely great. But if you make any changes to the user, so if you, let's say, grant the user permissions to something, or make the user a member of a group or something like that, then the object in the database, which in this case is the user, it has something called a sequence number. And that sequence number is then elevated. So the sequence number, with a combination of date and time stamps, will then force the directory database to replicate. All right. Now, within our domain here, within a site that we have, so for example, in London here, this is referred to as intra-site replication. All right. And it's automatic. It just happens automatic. All right. And actually, in Windows Server 2022, 2019, and so on, it replicates every 5 minutes. All right. And this uses a protocol called RPC, Remote Procedure Calls. What happens, though, if we're slightly larger? Well, in this case, you can see that this organization, adatum.com, perhaps has a number of subsidiaries. So, for example, you might have offices in the US and the offices in Japan. But you want, obviously, it's impossible to manage all of these resources in one location. So you might have, or you might decide to create what we call subdomains or children. And here we have a forest of trees. So our US is managed by our US team of administrators, and our Japan team here, Japanese team, are managed by those Japanese administrators. Now, in this case, if we also have multiple sites, so let's say, for example, we have got, this is adatum.com, and we have got multiple sites all over the world, but even if we're just in one domain, so assuming this is just one domain, you can see here that in this case, I've got 3 domain controllers in North America, 3 in South America, 3 in Africa, and a couple in Europe here and 1 in Australia. Now, you'll notice that some of these I've highlighted in black, and I just realized I've forgotten to do one here. And what that means is we refer to this as a bridgehead server. Now, there are two parts to Active Directory. There's the logical side, so how are you going to structure your users and your devices into things like organizational users, or organizational units rather, which I covered earlier. But we also have to think about how you're going to manage sites. So that means the physical replication of your databases. So in this case, we might have 4 sites here. And so rather than replicating everything here, basically all the domain controllers replicate to a bridgehead server, and we then set up connectors from one bridgehead server to the other so that it replicates everything from within the site. And this is, as I said, is called inter-site replication, and it uses a protocol, or it uses a service called domain replication connectivity. So those are the concepts. Now what we're going to do is let's take a look at where all of this fits in Active Directory. So now that we've seen a little bit of the theory, what I want to do now is jump in the demo. Now, first up, I just want to talk about the Active Directory database and how it's structured. Let's take a look. So I'm beginning my demo here on my Windows Server 2019 domain controller, and I'm going to go in here to Server Manager. And as you can see, this particular machine has got Active Directory, and it's also got DNS and various other services installed as well. So what I want to do, just to show you a little bit of the practical side of what I was just discussing, I'm going to go into Windows Explorer, and I'm going to come down here into the C drive. I'm going to click on View, and I'm going to show the file name extensions, and I'm also showing the hidden items here as well. So I'm going to come in here to Windows, and in Windows there's a couple of very important features in here, and this one is called NTDS, and NTDS means NT, or New Technology Directory Services, and this was the directory services going way back quite a few years. Now in here you can see this is the magic file. This is our ntds.dit, and this is our directory database, and it's absolutely critical that this is maintained and managed properly and doesn't get damaged. Now, to help us with that, you can see that we also have a number of other files in here. So you have got log files, and essentially, basically what happens is at regular intervals, when the user is logging in and directory operations are going, this is something called Joint Engine Technology, or JIT. And basically, the way this works is transactions or database transactions are held in memory. And when the transaction has been completed, it gets written to a log file. All right. Once the log file reaches a certain size, and you can see here, it's then committed to the database. All right. So in actual fact, for IT operations, it's a really good idea to separate log files from the database. So when you set up your Windows server, typically you would store the database on a separate physical disk, because the chances of both going at the same time would be quite rare. So if you had a complete disaster, you would restore the database and then replay the log files back to the point of failure. All right. So really important feature, that's the NTDS database in the Windows folder. Now the other very important folder that I mentioned in the video or in the demo earlier is called the SYSVOL folder. And you can see here, if I just scroll down, here is the SYSVOL folder. And in SYSVOL here, if I just go in, you can see these are all my policies. And the policies are all your group policy settings, your group policy templates for both machines and your users. And again, it's critical that these replicate correctly, because then the users wouldn't get their correct settings. All right. The other thing that you can also have in here are things like log on scripts, log off scripts. Again, I don't have any at the moment here. So just to show you, those are the core folders and also what they contain. Now, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to come back into my domain here, and just to remind you that in here we manage all our logical aspects of Active Directory in here. So Active Directory, users and computers, this is where you manage all the logical aspects of Active Directory. One interesting thing that you definitely want to switch on, by the way, if I come into View here and click on Advanced Features, you'll notice here that there's an awful lot more objects that are now visible. So for example, in here we now have a folder called Lost and Found. And this again is absolutely critical. And the reason for that is basically, if I go back into the Server Manager and click on Tools, I'm going to go into the Active Directory Admin Center. And it's amazing how many people don't know this. In the Admin Center, which is a nice kind of shortcut to our various tools here, if I click into our datum, which is the name of our domain, you'll notice here that we have something called Enable Recycle Bin. And this is an irreversible action, ladies and gentlemen. So when you click onto this, it switches this feature on and you can't reverse it. And the reason why it's off by default is because you needed a minimum of Windows Server 2008 R2 for this. All right. Now, hopefully we're all along a lot further than that. And the reason for this is so important is that obviously if you delete an object, it goes into a recycle bin normally. But if you don't switch the recycle bin on, when you delete an object, it's gone for good. Now, if you're replicating in the cloud, so if you've got a hybrid deployment in the cloud and you delete an object on premises, it also deletes the object in the cloud. But if you need to restore the object, then of course you've got nothing to restore and you have a nightmare on your hands. So that's a really good tip. Just watch out for that. That's, as I said, the Active Directory Admin Center. So the next thing I want to take a look at, and we've talked about it in the theory section, is Active Directory replication. So let's talk about inter-site and intra-site replication. So back here in Server Manager, I'm going to go up into Tools, and this time we're going to take a look at Active Directory Sites and Services. All right. So in Active Directory Sites and Services, you can see here it's talking about sites, and sites really talks about the replication of the physical NTDS.dit database and all the log files. And you can see here that we have a couple of folders, so inter-site transports, and we also have subsites. Now you can see that we also have our first site, which is called default first site name. Okay, now I can just go in here and I can call this, if I want to, I'll just call this a datum HQ. All right, so I can call this, anything you want. You can change the name of that, so that's not really an issue. Now, if I go in, I've only got one site at the moment here, right? So if I go into this site, you can see that we've got something called Edge Sync Services. And this is used in, for example, if you're connecting to synchronization with Azure Active Directory. But in here, you can see that at the moment, I've just got a single server. So I'm going to go into London DC1, and you can see that if I click onto this, you can get the information, what tells you what it is, and it tells me that it's a domain controller. And of course, Active Directory, how do we find content in Active Directory? Well, you remember from my first video, the basics of Active Directory, that it uses protocols called LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and it also uses DNS to locate objects within the directory. Now, if I just expand and if I go into my NTDS settings here, you can see it says, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to replicate the configuration of the selected domain controller? Do you want me to replicate to the selected DC? Or do you want me to create a new Active Directory domain services connection? And again, you can do the same thing. So do I want to create a new connection, for example? Now, of course, if I had a second server here, like I said in my original demo, to be honest, if it's internal or intra-site replication, you typically don't really need to do that much. But if you do want to create a connection, you can see I can come into here and I can then browse to my other server, okay? And I can just search for my other server and it would then obviously go ahead and create a connection. Now, if you go into the properties of the connection here, you can see I can put in a description, and as well as getting the shortcut menu options, you also get the menu here as well. So it's the same thing. Now, the other thing here is you'll notice that this domain controller is something called a global catalog. And one of the roles that Active Directory has is something called a global catalog server. And a global catalog is the complete catalog of all your objects within Active Directory. Think of it like your structure of everything. So in the Connections tab, you can see that it shows me who I'm replicating to and from. And in this demo, you can see I've only got one domain controller, so it's not going very far. Now, everything is an object in Active Directory, so users, computers, servers, and so on. And it shows you the object class, so this is a domain controller, when it was created and also when it was last modified. And as I said in my original description, every object generates what we call sequence numbers, unique sequence numbers. And you can see here, USN. Okay, and so basically we have every single object generating a date time stamp. So if there are any changes in a domain object, a user, computer, whatever, if you change the password, if you make the user a member of a group, it will increase the unique sequence number and it will then force a replication. All right. Now, of course, every object has security, okay? So in this case, the only permissions that it really needs is the right to read something. So we're not writing anything, we're not changing anything here. Now, the other feature here that we also have is, I mentioned that every object is an object in a database, and objects have attributes. First name, last name, email address, location, city, country, phone number, and so on. And you can go in here and you can see the configuration. So you can see here that it's, again, it's in LDAP format. And again, if you'd missed my description on LDAP, I recommend that you go back and watch that first video that I did. And again, I'm going to post a link in my video here for that. Okay, so those are the NTDS settings for London DC1. Now, if I go to the site here, and again, I'm going to go into properties of the site, you can see I can stick a location here. These are just clear text objects. And you can see, as I mentioned, every single object generates a unique ID, okay? And again, every single object, again, has an attribute editor. All right. Now, if I just expand this and go into the server, so you can see I've got the server here and go into the properties of the server. Again, if I had multiple servers here, I could then select a protocol to replicate. Now, if I wanted to do inter-site replication, so for example, if I had multiple servers, I could actually use one of these protocols. So the IP protocol, so if you've got a nice fast broadband connection, which to be fair, most of us do nowadays, this is great. An older protocol, SMTP, watch out for that one. SMTP is not the most secure protocol. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just heading back into my sites and services here. And like I said, you can see that we now also have a folder here called subnets. Okay, and this of course is your IP subnet. So assuming that we've got a datum, we've got a site here for a datum, one of the things that you might want to create is you might want to create another site. And this other site, let's call this my London site. Okay, you can't have any spaces. And it's asking, hey, do you want, which connector do you want to use? And at the moment, I've only got one default site link. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to accept that. Again, you get a little note of details. And then you can see I've now created my London site. The next thing that you would normally do is you would go up here into subnets and you would create a subnet and associate that subnet with your new London site. Again, because I've only got one domain, I can't do that here, all right? But if you had multiple servers, multiple sites, you would be able to do that, all right? Now, the next thing that I could do is obviously, at the moment, I don't have any servers. So one thing that I could do is I could obviously add a server in here, and I could call this London DC2 if I wanted to. So again, we've got our two sites. I've explained what the subnet is. Now that you've got the subnet and you've associated it with London 2, the next thing then is to determine what transport we're going to use. Now, as I've mentioned, with intrasite replication, this uses a protocol called RPC, Remote Procedure Calls. That basically means that it replicates automatically, and you really don't need to do that much. However, if you are using intersite replication, then you can choose between one of these two protocols. So IP, of course, if you've got nice fast connections, which let's face it, most of us do nowadays, or we could time travel back to the 90s in Doc's time machine and you could use the old SMTP. I don't really recommend that. It's not the most secure on the planet. Okay, so just going back into my servers here. So if I go back into my servers, like I said, you've got DNS, you've got my NTDS settings here. If I just go into the settings, again, it will show you any connections that you have, so where it's replicating to and from. It will show you the object. It will show you the current USN value, so the unique sequence number. Remember what I said, it replicates generally about every 5 minutes. So there we have it, just a little bit about directory replication of the Active Directory database in sites and services. So for the final component, I want to take a look at Active Directory domains and trusts. And let's just talk about how that works. So now we talk about probably one of the more challenging areas of Active Directory and the subject of Active Directory domains and trusts. And here we can see, as I mentioned, I've got a datum.com, so a datum.com, and we have a forest of trees. But the thing to note here is that they all share the same address space, okay? Now you can see that we have basically connectors between these objects here, all right? And essentially within a single forest, everything is replicated. So we have, this is called a two-way transitive trust. So all the objects are replicated everywhere. So it doesn't really matter where you log in, you would get access to your content. Now, if I just swing over here, let's say, for example, that this is a different domain. So let's call this domain Contoso, all right? So this is a completely separate company, and we want to build a relationship between these two organizations, all right? They could be, for example, they could be business partners or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the arrow here. I'm going to create a relationship between Contoso and a datum. So for example, Contoso wants to access content with a datum and likewise. Now again, in this case, Contoso are basically saying, I trust a datum, you see, because the arrow is pointing to the person or the organization that you trust. So the easy way to remember that is you point to the person you trust. And the analogy might be, you might want to loan your car to your son. Yes, so you hand him your set of car keys. You trust him with those keys, right? Now, trust relationships can either be one-way or two-way. So in essence here, Contoso is trusting a datum with its resources. Now, of course, trust relationships can either be one-way or two-way trust relationships. So again, I can say, okay, in this case, I want a datum to be able to trust Contoso. So we have a two-way trusts. Now, just a little bit of terminology for you. There are two types of trust, implicit and explicit. So I explicitly trust somebody. So in this case, these are explicit trusts. Whereas in this case, because this is a forest of trees, we have two-way, what we call transitive trusts. And transitive trust means that permissions can flow in either direction. You understand? Okay. So with that in mind, let's jump over to the virtual machines and let's have a quick look. So back in Server Manager, I'm going to click on Tools, and from here, I'm going to come into Active Directory, Domains and Trusts. So on the subject of trusts, what I want to do is I'm just going to right-click my domain, and I'm going to come into Properties, and you can see that we have a tab that says Trusts. And you can either have domains trusted by this domain, so this is an outgoing trust, or domains that trust you, and this would be an incoming trust. So I'm going to go into here, I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to create a new trust relationship. Now, a couple of things, you can connect to a Windows domain, a Windows NT4 domain, very unlikely that you would time travel back to the 1990s, but there we go. A Kerberos 5 realm. So there are a number of organizations that run Kerberos that's not Active Directory, so you could connect to that. Or there's other forests that you can also connect to as well. So I'm just going to click on Next, and I'm going to say, okay, what's the domain name of the organization that you want to connect to? So for this example, I'm going to create a relationship to Contoso.com. So I'm just going to create a relationship here to Contoso. And this is called just a realm trust. So if you're not sure whether it's domain controller or what it is, it doesn't really matter. So that's fine. So is it a non-transitive or is it a transitive trust? So a non-transitive means that you only trust in one direction, whereas a transitive trust, it would be the two arrows that I just showed you. Yes? So it would flow in both directions, okay? For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to say non-transitive. And do you want to create a two-way trust relationship, or do you want to just do a one-way incoming or one-way, for example, outgoing? Again, for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to say, yep, I want to have a two-way trust relationship with Contoso. I can put in a password here, so I'll just put in a password. Oh, right. I'll just make it a very simple password, and if any of you are security people, then you'll probably see that my password is very easy to guess. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on next. All right, now, there we go. So I click on finish, and you can now see I've created a two-way trust relationship, but you'll notice it's not transitive. But again, I can easily go back into this and you can make it transitive if you want to. All right. So again, I can just select that relationship and I can choose whether it's transitive or not transitive. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you create a trust relationship between two organizations. Very cool. Now, the final component that I just want to show you in Active Directory and domains and trusts involves, I'm just going to right click here, and I mentioned something called, you'll have noticed it in the screen actually. In fact, if I just go back into my domain and click on properties, it talks about the domain functional level and the forest functional level. And this is to do with the version of Active Directory that you're actually running. So is it Windows Server 2008, 2012, 16, 19, 22, and so on. All right. Now, you can right click here and you can raise the domain functional level. Now, at the moment, I'm already at my kind of maximum level. All right. This is absolutely fine. But if you were on, let's say, Windows Server 2012 or something like that, you would then raise that up. Okay. Now, the one thing just to say here, when it talks about the domain, we're referring to, you would basically update all the domain controllers in the domain first before you update the forest functional level, because these things are irreversible, all right? And you could easily break something. So again, handle with great care. So there you have it, Active Directory Advanced Skills. Hey, listen, I really hope you enjoyed it and you got a lot out of it. Now, as promised, we got a new feature this week. This is question time. Okay, so this week's question time, I'm going to go to my question time video, which you just seen, and I had loads of questions this week. So I'm going to be really nice. Shelley was first. So Shelley, you basically said to me, thanks for the opportunity to ask questions. What made you want to start these videos? You know, somebody asked me this the other day, and for me, the motivation was simple. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. So if you've learned something through my video, I'm absolutely honored and thrilled at that. Okay? If you're a caretaker, if you're a cleaner, and no matter what job that you're in, if you've always dreamed about getting a job in IT and you've gone ahead and you've passed that certification exam, I've done my bit. and I'm thrilled for you. And that's the reason why I did it. All right. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I really hope that you've learned a lot this week. And thank you so much. If you've got questions, comments, feedback, of course, just get them down below. And of course, if you've not subscribed to the channel, then please, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and come and be part of this great community. That's it for this week. I'll see you soon, and you stay safe. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.